Welcome back to the Shield Armory. We are hitting workplace relationships again today. Last week we got to talking with you guys about that, particularly about what healthy and unhealthy relationships look like. But today we want to go into the second half of that. I am Chaplain Hughes. I'm here with Chaplain Potter and Chaplain Stephenson, and we are glad that you are here with us today. So last week, guys, we talked about healthy relationships, unhealthy relationships, particularly about workplace relationships. And we shared with everybody that there was a second half of this that we wanted to talk about. And so that's what we're doing today. And so we want to take what we talked about last week, and now we want to start out by saying, now that we know those things, now that we know what a healthy workplace relationship looks like and what an unhealthy workplace relationship looks like, what do we do now? Like, how do we actually take what we've talked about and make it matter? Why does what we've talked about matter? And now what do we do with it? So let's dive into that and dive into what that looks like.
Yeah. So let's have a good year moment. The rubber's got to meet the road somewhere. And so we've just talked about on a high level what healthy relationships are, what unhealthy relationships are. So let's try to figure out from the healthy side first. So now what? Now, let's see if we look at our life and realize the relationships, the coworkers that I have in my life, that as we've just described all that, we have said, man, they are healthy. If that's the case, then what do we do?
Hey, if everything we're looking at in our relationships is looking good, then, man, just keep it going, right?
I mean, but realistically here, if we really think that everything that is good, do we really have a good hold or good perception on what's actually taking place? I mean, 'cause I've had some good times in my life, but I'm telling you, I don't know that I've ever had a time where I've thought that every single relationship and everything I have got going on is going well.
So let's rephrase. If we look at our relationships, those coworkers, and we realize that there are a couple people in our zone that meet the healthy category, it would probably be appropriate for us to reach out and say, hey, thank you for being a good friend.
Yeah.
Just listen to this podcast, and I'm truly thankful for our friendship, thankful that you are dependable, thankful that you are confidential, thankful that you are.
My apologies. I didn't know where you were trying to go with that. Sorry about that, man. I was like, I'm not 100% sure what we're doing here. So
I'm just not used to being the positive guy in the room, so it's like everybody's like,
no, and I think there's a flip side. Not only can you do something like that, but that to me is the type of people, type of relationships that I want to invest deeper in, right? Because if those are the type of people that are good, healthy workplace relationships, good friendships within the workplace, those are the type of people that I want to. Okay, I know where we're at. We're in a good place. This is probably the type of person maybe I should probably dive into a little further, and maybe let them in a little bit more into my life, and then invite them to do the same thing with me, so that we know that. That we can be trusted. And so those are, again, the type of ones where, those ones I can trust, those ones that I know that I want to take a step further.
Yeah.
You also bring up a good point, though. When we have something good in our lives, right, we do have to continue to feed it.
Yep.
And when we have a good relationship, relationship with our coworkers, even if it's something that we don't take that relationship to a deeper level, but to maintain that healthy workplace relationship, we got to continue to feed into that. And I don't care who you are. Everybody wants to be appreciated. Everybody wants to have the pat on the back. As much as guys will gripe and complain about awards given out and that kind of thing. We all need encouragement. We all like to know that, hey, this person has noticed that I've done a good job. I've been dependable. I am trustworthy. Those kind of things. So you bring up a good point. When we have a good thing going, let's continue to feed into that so that we can keep it going.
Yeah, absolutely.
Affirm the good things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. If our friend is truly confidential, hey, man, I appreciate that I have you in my corner, that I know if I share stuff with you, you're going to keep it to yourself. Thank you for that.
And that's a good turn, right? Because the bottom line is we are really good about sharing things that we're critical about. But how good are we about sharing things that are going well? My wife and I, we have this thing that we like to do at restaurants when we have a really good server. We ask to speak to the manager, and their eyes get real big. And, and the reason why is because I feel like the only time people ever want to talk to the manager is when things are going wrong. we have a thing we want to tell a manager about when somebody's doing something well, about when they have a good serve or whatever. But that same thing is applicable here, right? Because we don't want to just be critical about when things are not good. We want to be, positive. We want to be affirming when things are going well.
Yeah. If moving past the healthy side, if I've realized that there are people in my life, coworkers, that I would say is unhealthy, that is an unhealthy relationship. It is toxic. It does not help me grow. It does not make me feel safe. It doesn't encourage me. It's full of gossip. There's resentment. There's tension. That person doesn't want to grow and get better. They handle conflict inappropriately. They're just toxic. What do we do with that? What do we do once we've identified that they are truly unhealthy?
I think there's some real truth to putting distance between us and other people. I think you have to learn the things that can be said. I think you can be friends and you can be acquaintances with people without them having to be in your inner circle, right? We were just having this conversation a little bit ago. It's totally okay for there to be people in your life where you realize, I don't know if this is the most healthy situation or healthy relationship for me to be in. And so therefore, I'm not going to completely cut this person out of my life, but I am going to back up from where I am. I'm going to put a little bit of distance between me and them. And I'm not going to share things that are of deep importance in my life with them. I still can have a relationship with them. I can still have a surface level relationship with them, and we get along and we work together fine. But they're just not going to be one of those people that are going to be in that inner circle. I love the way Jesus did relationships, right? He preached to the thousands. He changed the world with a group of men, a group of 12 men, but he had 3 really that were in his inner circle, right? He was very, very careful of how he did relationships, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I think that the bottom line is that we have to be very discerning, but yet we have to be very graceful when we do that, because it doesn't mean we treat people bad. It just means that we kind of pump the brakes a little bit and we pull back a little bit.
Yeah, there's always going to be those people, those coworkers that, hey, they're going to do their job. I'm going to do my job. To the extent that we, our paths cross at work and we've got to depend on each other, it's okay to have those kind of relationships. So I don't want anybody listening to this thinking, oh, you've got to be best friends with everybody in the departments that you serve.
Yep.
Like, that's just not realistic, and it's not a healthy thing to strive for. But be a good coworker. The other thing I would say is, if we have a coworker that gossips and stuff and is always saying, that gossip is only going to be as powerful or only going to take root if it has a place to land.
Yeah.
So, if you have that coworker who goes down that road, what's keeping you from walking away at that moment? We don't have to participate in every conversation that comes up. And oftentimes I've found that it only takes one person speaking up and just saying, hey, you know what? I'm out, and walking away, that oftentimes gives someone else the courage or the, just the moral check to say, oh, you know what? We are going down a bad path here. I'm out too. So I think those kind of in the moment decisions, when we know when something feels wrong, when the conversation's making that turn, that we choose not to participate in it, or we confront that and say, or push back a little bit, and that's easier for some than others, but, help put a stop to that kind of thing, because I think we've all been a part of, I know I've gone into lineups and things where maybe one person starts down a negative road on something that really doesn't have anything to do with what the shift is getting ready to do or anything like that, but they're bringing up something before the entire shift, and it just paints a negative picture on the day before they're even out the door to do their jobs.
Yeah.
I saw a supervisor here recently who I think did the best job that I've ever seen at challenging that. And I fell victim to the other side of the fence, that somebody came in and was being Eeyore about stuff, just super negative, and how they did it was very comical, and it was hilarious. And but what it was operating from a negative perspective, and it was not appropriate. It was not healthy at the root of it. And I watched that lieutenant say, you know what? I appreciate your voice and your opinion, and then challenged it and did it very appropriately, did not disrespect the person. It was not out of line. They didn't raise their voice, and it just challenged that negativity. And I think with our relationships and looking at, are they healthy, are they not healthy, it is appropriate to challenge the not healthy. Mm-hmm. We can do that in the right way. We can do that without wounding or hurting or snarling and showing our teeth. And I watched them do it. I believe that person felt loved by that supervisor, even in the correction. I watched it happen. And as we walked out into the streets, it was done completely. The fire was put out. You have inside of you, and I tell all the lineups this, that each and every one of us carry with us a bucket of gasoline and a bucket of water. And in the conversations and the relationships and everything that we have in front of us, we have an opportunity to put water on it, or we can put gas on it. And I watched that guy reach over and grab that water and just absolutely put the fire out. And in our unhealthy relationships, it is okay to reach over and put that water on it. That may come in the area of distance. That may come in the area of some contact, some restrictions, some boundaries. Mm-hmm. And that's very appropriate. And you can do that, again, without hurting people.
I think we also need to mention here that we need to do a lot of self-reflection, right? And again, deal with the person in the mirror. The temptation is when we talk about some of these things that we're always looking at other people and seeing what they're doing right, what they're doing wrong, and that kind of thing. But how are we doing? You know, how's Chaplain Potter? How am I doing being a friend, being a coworker? Am I dependable? Am I the guy that's trustworthy? When people share things with me that are really like meaningful, deep things that need to be held private, am I keeping those things confidential? Those kind of things. And you know, if there's things in my own life that I need to improve upon, if there's things that I need to do to be a better coworker and help to form those kind of healthy relationships in the workplace, then I need to be man enough, woman enough to acknowledge that, to admit that there's some things that I need to correct, I need to do better. And in that process, we may very well see that there's a person or two that we need to go to and maybe seek their forgiveness, or apologize maybe for how we have handled a situation or that kind of thing. And it may be something the other person is like, man, that's over and done with. I haven't even thought about that, but it's still something we need to go and clear the air, and just as far as it depends upon us, make things right.
Well, I think there's something too along with that, man, that it could be the type of thing like the example you just going to someone, they're like, hey, I hadn't even thought about that. But what if the person that we're asking to self-reflect, what if they're struggling with something they did and they've never forgiven themselves, but that other person's already forgiven them, you know? Because so if we're going to look in the mirror, maybe we need to also like not just seek forgiveness, but maybe we need to forgive ourselves. You know, maybe we need to offer some, we're asking people to give grace to other people, but maybe sometimes we need to look at giving grace to ourselves too, because, you know, we are going to fall short. We are going to mess up. We are going to make the bad decisions sometimes. We are going to say the things that we don't want other people saying to us sometimes, you know? So when we do that, we need to seek forgiveness, but at the same token, we need to be able to receive that, and we need to be able to let go. We need to be able to forgive ourselves in that too. That way that we can allow, that's the only way is that when it happens on both ends, that those relationships truly go from unhealthy to healthy. You know, that's the only real way that's going to happen.
Yeah.
So as we move on from what do we do now, let's talk specifically about forgiveness. You brought it up. Forgiveness is much like grace in our culture and our law enforcement family that we are so privileged to be able to serve. Grace is misunderstood, and it's not applied nearly enough. Forgiveness, I think, is if we have identified that person in front of me is unhealthy and they have hurt me, they have wounded me, is forgiving them, is that saying, hey, what you did to me was okay?
Absolutely not. I don't think that's ever the case, right? I think that's the thing with forgiveness is it's one of those things where you don't have strings attached to it. You recognize the fact that you've been wronged, you've been hurt, you've been whatever, and you're willing to say, hey, you forgive that person for what they've done. You don't do that, and then you say, but if you do this again, then we're going to have the same problem. I mean, obviously, you don't want to leave the door open for people to continue to hurt you, but that's not what I'm saying, because especially there are different realms that could sound different in. But what I'm saying is, like, just in a workplace relationship, like, you don't want to attach strings to forgiveness. You want to forgive, and then you've got to let it go. If you're going to get in an unhealthy, you might learn from that, and you might say, I might not bring this up in this group of people again. I might not talk about this again. But that's on me. That's not on them, right? And so I'm going to forgive them, no strings attached, and I've got to let this go. But what tends to happen is the enemy, especially, is really good about trying to get us to deal with this same things that we're forgiving people with over and over again. We get mad about it. I remember a pastor told me one time. He said, "You're going to be more mad about this a year from now than you are right now, and you're going to wake up one day and that person's not going to have done anything to you." But you're just going to wake up and you're going to be angry again, and you're going to have to choose to forgive them even though they didn't wrong you again. Because at this point, if you respond the wrong way, the sin is on you, not on them. And so that same thing applies here. Like when you forgive somebody, you forgive them, and then you move on. But when it starts to fester again, or maybe there's something that happens that kind of triggers you back to that moment again of that hurt, you have to make a conscious decision to let it go again. And maybe to even forgive again, even though that person hasn't wronged you.
And oftentimes I find that forgiveness leads me to readjust my boundaries. Mm-hmm. Right. So yes, I can forgive someone for what they've done. And I'm not going to hold that against them. Like I've forgiven that it's done, but I'm also, depending on the circumstance, will adjust my boundaries so that can't happen again from that individual. And I'm not talking about cutting somebody off entirely. I mean, there may come a time in a rare situation or whatever where you kind of have to do those kind of things. But wow, I can tell you, we were talking about actually before we started recording this, I was talking about with the guys a little bit about some of the relationships that I thought were never going to be able to be repaired. And, just being real with you in the flesh, I would be like that relationship's done. I don't want to have anything to do with that again. And yet God worked in such a way where now I have a relationship with those individuals, but there's boundaries in place in a different way, different boundaries than were in place before. So forgiveness is a tricky thing, but boy, is it so necessary to allow us to move on and to allow the door to be open for additional healing in that relationship with the person that offended us in some way or hurt us in some way.
Yeah, you bring up a very, very good point in terms of forgiving somebody, and you want to leave the door open for reconciliation. So again, if I look and I say this person that is in my life is unhealthy, that they should not have a seat at my table, they shouldn't be around me and my family, I probably shouldn't put a boundary in place in such a way that they can never, ever reconcile that and never fix that. That would be unhealthy on our part.
Yeah.
If that person really does some soul searching and digs deep and corrects that core issue, apologizes for that, makes restitution for it, they should be allowed back in. And if we truly, truly want reconciliation, we're not going to shut the door to that. So, for instance, if somebody has deeply wounded us in an area and they apologize and you say, yeah, that's 2 years too late, and walk on, what have you just done? You've just shut the door and you've said, I am choosing to hold on to this, and you are being unhealthy. So we have to look at these unhealthy relationships and make sure, again, that there is a door of reconciliation that's constantly open.
And one thing I hear a lot from officers is, and when we get into some deep conversations, is they begin to talking about, I'm going to use the term that they use, the walls that they put up. And I think it's really important for us to define there's a big difference. A boundary should be something that's healthy. A wall tends to be something that's unhealthy. It's two very different things that we're talking about here. Boundaries are healthy for your health. Walls are typically things we just throw up and we throw them up way too easy, and we throw them up in places we shouldn't put them up, and then we just never want to take them down. It's almost like we concrete them in.
Yeah, that's so good. And from a biblical perspective, of course, too, we're in no position as a believer in Jesus Christ. I'm in no position to withhold forgiveness. Yeah. And indeed, if we're told in Scripture, in the Lord's Prayer, and right after, right, if I withhold forgiveness, Jesus said pretty clearly, will I be forgiven?
Yeah.
He said, no. He said, if you will forgive others, then you'll be forgiven. If you withhold that, well, that's pretty serious.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So I'm in no position as someone who has been the recipient of incredible forgiveness on the part of my Savior and my God. Then I'm in no position to try to withhold forgiveness from somebody seeking that.
Yeah.
And again, forgiveness and reconciliation, two different things.
Yep.
Right? Forgiveness is a necessary part of reconciliation, but reconciliation is something different than merely forgiveness.
Yeah. So, we've talked a lot about the last episode in this one. We've talked a lot about what this looks like with the people that we're arm in arm with, we're doing this with every single day. But I really think we need to have a discussion about what this looks like with the people that are our superiors, that are our supervisors, that are command staff, because I know you guys are the same way I am. We hear a lot from officers about how they feel about supervisors and decisions, and command staff and decisions. And so when we talk about, workplace relationships, this is a big part of working and living every day in the law enforcement community, because they do have to live and work with supervisors and with command staff. And so let's transition a little bit and talk about what this looks like, not just in the day-to-day with the people that are, that they're doing this together with, but the people that are over them and the people that are, at the top making decisions, and what this looks like as far as relationships.
Man, this is a constant issue, I think, that we face as chaplains.
Yeah. Yep.
Where the rubber meets the road is that our supervisors are our authorities. And that's hard to swallow, specifically when your supervisor is not a good person, or they're not making good decisions, or they are not in that healthy category. What do you do then? That's what we all face. How do I interact with somebody that is not respectable? How do I respect somebody that doesn't deserve respect?
I think you said this before we started recording today, and I think we need to say this out the gate, because I think with this conversation, this has to be said up front. Bottom line is, there are really good supervisors, and then there are not. You can't get around it. There are good supervisors, and then there are not good supervisors. And at the end of the day, they're still a supervisor, right? They're still a command staff or whatever. And, we're not going to get into specifics necessarily about that or those type of things. But I think that we need to say that we recognize the fact that there are some really good supervisors, but then we recognize there are some that just aren't, and there's no getting around it. So, I think for those that are listening's sake, I think they need to hear us say that we recognize that along with them.
Yeah. And again, we're not trying to I'm not trying to take something that's nasty and awful and evil and bad and get you to pretend like it's okay.
Yep.
It's not okay. It's never okay for a supervisor to use their power inappropriately, to stop your career from advancing, to be nasty, to not approve your time off just because of stuff. It's never okay. But the question I always ask the individual, specifically that's underneath that supervision, the employee, we'll call them, how are you handling this? You have to be uniquely aware of my responses. And if I am being disrespectful, if I'm showing my tail, all I'm doing is giving the supervisor that's above me something else that they have to deal with. And now there's fuel behind whatever problem there is. So if I'm snarling, if I'm being disrespectful, if I'm not turning my stuff in, if I'm pushing the envelope, if I'm getting other people to do that, now what I have done is I've turned into a wolf. And the guy above me, they're a wolf. They're just going around biting people. It's terrible. Well, I have just mirrored their behavior just underneath. And that is not okay. That doesn't help. That doesn't help a supervisor, number one, see their problems. That doesn't help a supervisor do their job initially. It just complicates. That is not how we go about that. I think of times that I've been underneath supervision and I've supervised people. The healthiest thing you can do is sit down like two grown adults and do it in such a way where you can have the conversation to where it's not about person. It's not about the emotion, who is right or wrong. It's truly about the problem. And if you both can work on that, if you both can sit down, and I've told people to do this, and they said, yeah, I walked in the lieutenant's office and I said, you're wrong. I told you you're wrong. That was not my advice. My advice was for you to go in and be humble and say, hey, I don't know what's going on. And I don't know the information you have. I don't have the perspective you've had because I'm not the supervisor. And I will choose to follow you, and I will choose to respect you. Can you help me understand this? Why are you not approving my requests? Why is it always that my zone does this? And you may find there's a whole perspective of, hey, that's not actually true. Here, I'll show you. Oh, so I had this tension and perspective of you that's completely false. Or they may say, you know what? I did that intentionally. And this is why. Knowing your history, knowing your discipline, knowing all this, knowing stuff that you have no clue that I know about, I don't believe that to be wise for you. Okay, that's an easier pill to swallow. And then the harder conversation is when they say, yeah, I just don't like you. When the supervisor truly is that evil wolf, how do we interact with that? What do we do there?
Yeah, the example that immediately comes to mind from Scripture for me is Saul and David's relationship, where David, because Saul was God's anointed, that God put him in place, David had this incredible respect for the office, for the position. He honored God by honoring Saul. So what David was doing, he was doing ultimately for God. I think there's a lot to be learned, a lot to be said for that in and of itself. But Saul was somebody that, man, he loved to have David around at moments. But then jealousy and other things crept in, and to the point where Saul was actually trying to kill David. So, but what you find we don't have time to unpack this fully, but David continued to honor Saul even when he was not behaving honorably. And we can still, as an employee under supervision, we can still honor the position of the supervisor. We can still behave honorably towards command staff that we may in certain instances feel like they are not being honorable or doing what is right and fair. We can still honor that position it's important for us, especially if we ever hope to advance and be promoted, if that's something that we're wanting to do in our careers, we need to learn what it is to come under authority before we're ever going to be entrusted with authority. So it's important, as someone who's coming under authority, under a supervisor, our actions, the way we behave and respond to those over us, even when we, from our perspective, feel like it's not right, it makes a big difference.
And I think that one thing too that we need to be, just straightforward, clear about with that, man, is there are two levels of respect when it comes to those that are over us, right? There is the level of respect that comes with the position, with the title. But then there's also the level of respect that's earned. So regardless of whether you like or agree with what that person put into a place of leadership, they've been selected into that position. So there is a level of respect that comes with that title, whether it be sergeant, lieutenant, captain, deputy chief, whatever. I don't get it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the title is. But if somebody's been put in that position, there is a certain level of respect that's expected because of the title and the rank of that person, and it just is what it is. And so there's always a certain level of respect that should be given just solely based on the position. But then on the flip side, there's also the level of respect that's earned from that person and how they treat the people below them that they're managing and taking care of. So I think that one thing that we've got to, and that those who are listening to have got to remember, is you've got to go to these people. Gareth, I love what you said a second ago about going to a lieutenant and saying, look, hey, I'm struggling with this, and I really want to have some perspective of what's going on. Can you help me understand? I love that, because you go to that person and you've given them that respect that they've earned with that position. But in turn, you're still seeking that clarity, but you're doing it in such a way that gives them the ability to respond in such a good way. If they respond ugly at that point, that's on them. We're in a whole different set of circumstances at that place. But the reality is, when you're setting the stage for that kind of conversation, just because you're saying, I respect you because of the position that you hold, but I'm looking for clarity. Can you help me with that? That's a whole different, that's a game changer, man. That's a whole different way.
It can really, all of us have been in position of leadership, and I know I pastored churches for 23 years, and how people approached me made all the difference in the world.
Yep.
If I just had somebody that just wanted to attack me, and as Gareth, you were saying earlier, just dealing with the emotional level of things, it was really hard to hear what they were going to say and do anything other than just put it in one ear and out the other. But if somebody came to me humbly and genuinely wanted, they had a concern. Maybe maybe a decision I made, maybe I did make a mistake. Maybe there's something I didn't do right, or maybe they just didn't have the more complete perspective on it, or whatever, information on it. But if somebody approached me, I always, when we come under someone else, we can either help build them up as our supervisor and help them do their jobs, and am I, as someone who's coming under authority, am I doing everything I can to make that supervisor look good? And maybe that's a weird perspective to have, but what benefit is there to me trying to make the supervisor look bad, or talking poorly about them, or tearing them down, or attacking them? There's no benefit to that for me, who's under that person. There's no benefit to that, so how can I positively make an impact on those over me? Well, you win more flies with honey than vinegar, right? So I think
Yep. You go, and Scripture is very clear. If your leader above you has 100% black and white been in the wrong. That just no way to slice and dice it. They are wrong. Scripture is very clear on how we interact with that. And it's very, very specific in Matthew 18 how we do that.
Yeah.
We do that one-on-one. Why? Because it just doesn't involve the whole zone. This doesn't involve the whole police department. I don't have to put on Facebook, having a tough meeting with my supervisor today. No, it's just one-on-one, because at that point, you get to be honest and get to be vulnerable. It also explains how we rebuke people and how we challenge those in authority above us. It has to be with gentleness, with respect. And if I do that, then that allows me a place and a seat at that person's table. I think back to times when I was in leadership. I too think of when people would challenge and buck the authority. Man, that just added another thing on my sheet of music that I had to play. That is just one more thing that I had to think about. And they never had the full story. They never had it. And so I would just say, if you're looking at a supervisor and you're going, man, they are just the worst, just please take a step back, breathe a little bit. One thing that I typically do before I talk to people, and I learned this very early on, a guy above me, actually, that I reported to, taught me this. If you have a problem with someone, you wait 1 week before you talk to them. If I have a problem with somebody and I go right now, I'm going in with both barrels.
Yeah.
And I'm going loaded for war. And it's not going to be about the problem. And I need that time to cool down. And so I will often pray for 1 week. And I pray these things: Lord, fix the problem before I ever get there. If this supervisor is just nasty and always grumpy, Lord, would you help this supervisor? Would you help them to work through that? And oftentimes the Lord's pretty good at working with stuff where we don't have to mess with it. The second thing is, Lord, would you change my perspective or correct me? If I'm viewing it, if I'm just sensitive, if I'm whatever, could you fix me before I go start to wage war? It might be my problem. Maybe nobody else in the room is having the problem that I am. Fix me. Then I would pray, Lord, if not, would you open the door to where we could talk about this? It is so much easier when the Lord opens a door than for you to drag a sledgehammer and make your own entranceway. When that happens, and I had a secretary one time that told me, and I would be vulnerable, said, hey, here's what I'm facing, here's what's happening, here's what I'm going to do. What she would say is, you don't know this, but in the several years that I worked for you, every single time you did that, you came back with a different perspective, and you did differently than when you told me that first day in your office. And I had no clue. What it did was it allowed me to see it for truly what it was, to see it through not red eyes, not angry, but see it through an appropriate perspective, and it allowed time to work. So if that happens with your supervisors, if those that are above you, give them respect, talk to them like a person, explain to them what's going on, and just allow that a little bit of grace. If the supervisors are not good, and we've had those all in our life, we've had those in church, we've had those in the police departments we've served in, and the fire departments we've served in, men and women that probably should not have got that promotion. And it is clear to everybody except for that person, they should not be there. What do we do then? Do we write them off? Do we make their life miserable? How do we handle an inappropriate supervisor?
Well, at the end of the day, and I'm going to sound like the old guy here, but at the end of the day, I was hired to do a job.
That's it.
So I'm going to do my job.
Yep.
And ultimately, I'm doing what I do, not for the supervisor, not for the department. Ultimately, as a follower of Christ anyway, I'm doing everything I do unto God, as we're told in Colossians 3. And so that helps me. If I remember, if it helps me put things in perspective, if I remember it's truly about an audience of one for me, there has to be something bigger. There has to be something bigger for me to serve than a supervisor or a department or that kind of thing. So I can deal with some of the difficult individuals when I have a greater perspective of who it is I'm really serving and what it is I'm doing. I wasn't hired by Department A, Department B, whatever. You were not hired by that department to work for, to only work for the supervisors that you get along with and like.
True.
You were hired to do your job, period. Now, again, in an ideal world, you're going to have the best supervisor ever. You're going to have a great relationship there. You're going to have strong leaders and all that. That would be ideal. That would be wonderful. But sometimes that doesn't happen. Sometimes people get promoted beyond their capacity to lead. That happens everywhere. And sometimes we need to be patient too and understand that these men and women that have been promoted, they may really be struggling to figure out how to lead and what it means for them to lead at the level that they've been promoted to.
Turns out supervisors are people too.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's hard.
Yeah. And I would say too, like, you're not the only one that recognizes that there's an issue. If a supervisor really is struggling, if it's somebody who, Garrett, I'm going to use your terminology, somebody who we all realize should not have been promoted, you're not the only one that sees that, But I do think one of the greatest things you have to offer is your ability to do your job at your best, and your ability to be as obedient as possible to that supervisor. Gareth, you actually wrote down in our notes we were talking about for today, obedience is not agreement necessarily always, but obedience is just simply being obedient, and so if I would never ask you to do something, or we would never ask you to do something, or do we support you doing something that a supervisor asks you to do that's blatantly wrong? I think that's where a line has to be drawn. If you're asked to do something that's completely against everything we know to be right, that's different. But if a supervisor asks you to do something and you don't necessarily know why, or maybe you're questioning it, maybe, if it's not something that's blatantly wrong or something that's going to cause harm to someone, it might be worth saying, you know what, I'm going to give it a shot and see what happens. Maybe this is their way of handling something differently than somebody else would, or whatever. But I think sometimes one of the greatest things we can do in a situation where we find ourselves in those moments where we're working under and for someone that we don't understand why or why they're in that role is being obedient and being a good employee. Like Darren, like you said, we're not hired to work for them. We're hired to work for the organization and to do our job. And so doing our job means doing our job regardless of who's over us. And at the end of the day, that job remains the same.
Just boiling down to just a policy in your department. You report to that supervisor. They are your authority, for better, for worse. When you go to PSU or internal affairs, what they're going to do is they're going to say, who do you report to? And you're going to have to list them as your supervisor. They're not going to ask, well, have they been fair to you? Are they good? Do they respond to your emails appropriately? No, who is your supervisor? That's the black and white answer. And so part of our integrity is following underneath them and doing that with obedience. Now, again, as we've talked about, if there's a line of moral and ethical or integrity things, that can be a very easy self-fixing problem if you handle yourself correctly. I think back to outside of the moral, ethical situation, there was an officer who, and I saw the evidence of this whole situation. The supervisor stepped out of their normal mode of operation and performed very poorly, was not a good leader, was very toxic, and was doing things that was wrong. And there was an officer that went and reports up to that supervisor, went and had a meeting and said, hey, just between me and you, this is not okay. And I love you and I support you and I'll go to war with you. And I got your back. But we really need you and we really need this to be corrected. Is there anything that I can take off your plate so we can fix this? Wasn't accusatory, wasn't snarling, wasn't any of that. And to this day, that supervisor said that's one of the most important conversations they've ever had in their entire life. Changed their career,
Wow.
Changed their outlook.
That's powerful.
Yeah. If you do that, you're investing, you're leading up, you're leading without rank. And that's what our supervisor needs. And they'll have your back. If they're asking you to do moral things that are not okay or reporting things that are not okay, that's a pretty simple solution. That's a conversation with somebody above them to get that corrected. That should not happen, and it's a pretty black and white issue to be able to correct.
Well, and I will say, as a chaplain, I pray for all of those officers who are serving our departments. I pray for all of you, men and women. But I also, I spend a great deal of time praying for the command staff, for the supervisors. It's a heavy burden, and people may not realize what it is to carry the weight that some of these supervisors and command level and some of the weight that they carry is enormous, and it's not to make light in any way of what the patrol officer on the street's doing. That's, what you all are doing is incredible. But I tell you what, when you are in a position to have to make decisions that is impacting multiple people, and the higher up the chain of command there, the more people that are being impacted by your decisions, decisions that are going to be questioned and scrutinized, and it's tough. It's a heavy load. So it would behoove all of us to pray for our leaders, right? We're instructed to in Scripture to pray for those over us. That's, I think, can certainly be true in the first responder world as well, to pray for those who are in supervision over you. And let's see what we can do to encourage them and help them. It's only to our benefit to see that they're encouraged and that we are doing what we can to make their jobs easier and make them feel good about what they're doing. We are going to benefit from them being encouraged in a better place.
Yeah. You bring up encouragement. Recently heard of an officer that said that supervisor saved my life. And they told me this whole story. And I said, well, man, that's incredible. Have you ever told this supervisor that? They're like, no, I haven't. It's like, really? So that supervisor today doesn't know that you saved their life? I'm like, no. I said, would you mind to tell them that? They're like, no, I don't know if I could. I said, well, could I tell them that? And they say, yeah, absolutely, please. You have my permission. Go tell all the details. And I went into it was a lieutenant. I went to that lieutenant's office. I said, hey, I got some good gossip for you. And I told it to him. And they almost got teary-eyed, and they said, you never hear those stories. Yeah. Thank you for that. So I say that to say, if you're serving underneath someone that maybe shouldn't be in that position or has weaknesses like we all do, there are good things that you can encourage them on. Go breathe life into them. Yeah. Hey, supervisor, thank you for caring about blank. If you have a supervisor that's really big on appearance and it's super frustrating because they want it to look this way, want everything to be uniform, and whatever the case may be, man, thank you for caring about how we look. I really appreciate that. Just breathe life into them, and that'll be life-giving to you as well. One story I'll share with is in working with heads of departments in our local area, and then thankfully across the state and in some regards, you begin Scripture says, out of the overflow of your heart, your mouth speaks, as we've already mentioned. You start hearing what's on the heart of our chiefs and our sheriffs, and it's a lot. As Darren, as you were saying, it's heavy. And I think back to a conversation that I had here recently, and I'm going to truncate some of it and make it to where you're not going to know who I'm talking about, but it was an issue that came up in a department, and I happened to fall with the officers. I agreed with the officers. I sympathized with them. And I actually went and spent time with this number one in the department and was just interacting with them, and that conversation got brought up. And I saw the anguish on that leader's face. And what was happening was if they listened to the officers and they agreed with the officers, then it would hurt the community. The decision that if he sided with the officer, it would hurt the community. And I agreed. I saw the whole problem. And if he sided with the community, then the officers would say he's not for us. And it was a lose-lose, and he didn't know what to do. And I just saw that anguish. He wanted to do this. He wanted to serve the community. He wanted to, and then long-term, he said, if I do this for the officers, they'll feel supported, and it's going to make their lives a lot harder in a couple years. And they don't see that. And I just thought, man, the cost of being a leader. I mean, he's laying awake at night, and all these people are thinking that he's not decisive, he's not making decisions, he's just out of touch, he hasn't worked patrol in years. And all those things may be true, but man, it cost him. So give them a little bit of grace. Let them have room to fail. Let them have room to breathe just a little bit. Again, we're not excusing stupidity. We're not excusing bad leadership. It is what it is, but let's try to make sure we have our actions in check. We understand there is a bigger picture outside of just my district.
I just had this conversation with an officer on patrol just the other night, and we were talking about something, and they were struggling to try to figure out why something was happening the way it was happening. And I looked at him and I said, look, man, I said, the bottom line is they're having to make decisions for the greater good of the whole. They can't make decisions based on what one person wants or what two people want. They're looking at not just the current status of the department, but they're thinking 5 years down the road, this is what's going to be best for the department. So they're making decisions now that, yes, affect you now, but they're going to have even greater, just like you were talking about, like it's going to affect those officers 5 years down the road and make their life harder. That's exactly what I was trying to tell him, is these decisions that you don't understand because you're not at these levels of leadership. You're not having to wrestle with what is the best for this entire department. You're thinking about what's best for you and your platoon. You're not thinking about what's best for, detectives and SIU and, everybody involved in the whole gamut. They're thinking, how do we make this the best it can be for everybody? And sometimes when they make decisions, they're hard decisions. But I love what you said, because we need to support them. These officers, you need to support them. You need to encourage them, even if you don't understand that they need that, because again, they're seeing things at a level that officers below are not able to see. They're not at those places. They're not making those decisions they're making. They're not privileged to the information they have. And so support and encouragement is something that goes so far and such a long way. And they could definitely, it could be a game changer. If we were to look at it that way, if officers were to look at it that way.
Be an ally.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'll tell you what,
be an ally.
Talking about relationships and these episodes that we're doing, I tell you what, it's not easy stuff, is it?
No, it's not. No,
Nope.
Absolutely not. But it's been good, man. And I think I really hope for all of you that are listening, I really hope, and we hope as a group of chaplains that do this day in and day out, we hope maybe this episode's encouraged you. Maybe you'll be encouraged, because maybe you listen to this today and as you're listening, you're thinking, man, I'm really struggling with this. I'm really having a hard time with this right now. Our hope is that maybe this will help you chew through some of that. And hopefully this will encourage your heart, encourage your mind. And maybe in turn, maybe you can go into that person you're struggling with, that leader you're struggling with. And you can say, look, man, I don't understand this. Can you help me understand? Can you help me? I want to support you. I've got your back. Just like you said earlier. Help me understand. Maybe today this will encourage you. And so we really hope that that's what it's been for you. And it's been good for us, because we have these conversations all the time. So it's nice for us to be able to sit down and chew through some of this stuff that we see and hear on a daily basis.
Yeah, and just a reminder, you've heard us refer to Scripture several times. Sometimes we're quoting an exact verse. Sometimes we're just referring to something. But boy, is there a lot of guidance in God's word, right? There's wisdom, there's truth there. And, if one of us can help you dive in and look for some answers, if you want to just kind of chew through some of this in a little bit more detail, just reach out, let us know. That's what we're here for.
Yeah, you can, if you're an officer or spouse of an officer or something in a department that we currently serve, our information is easily accessible to you. If you're listening and you're not currently part of a department that we serve, we would love to still connect with you. And so you can reach us. You can go through our website, shieldchap.org. You can email each of us. Our email addresses are our last names at shieldchap.org. So Hughes at shieldchap.org, Potter, Stephenson at shieldchap.org. We'd love to talk to you. We'd love to hear from you. You can reach out through our social channels on Facebook and Instagram. There's lots of ways to get in touch with us, and we will respond to you. We will get back. If you don't get us initially, that might mean we're with an officer or we're in a department or whatever, or maybe we're even with our family, but I can guarantee you that you will hear back from one of us, and we will get back in touch with you. So this has been a great conversation, guys. I'm looking forward to the next one, and we look forward to having you back with you guys on our next episode.